Well, we've all seen the ongoing industrial dispute with the New South Wales government over paying conditions. Unions have rallied on the streets in a week of strikes in the state. Today, teachers walk off the job and rail workers strike as they demand better working conditions and increased pay. Joining me live now is the Secretary of the Australian Council of Trade Unions, Sally McManus. Sally, thanks so much for your time. First on the teachers, this is really dragging on now. What do teachers actually want?
Well, I mean, this all goes down to the issue of, for them, about it being more than thanks. They've been through the pandemic. They've had a whole review into their sector, and it says that you're not going to attract the teachers that, that state needs unless the pay reflects, the professional values and what's required now in that job. So what they want is a pay rise that makes sure that not just for now keeping up with the cost of living, but means into the future that we can attract the very best quality people into the teaching profession.
Much of this is about student ratios as well. You can't find people straight away. I think you'd concede that. But the government can do things that can alleviate pressure in the near future. So what could the government announce today that would stop these strikes?
Oh, listen, I'm not in a position to say that. I'm not the negotiator for the teachers' union, so I wouldn't want to be putting that on the table at all. I just say that, where you've got across the board a policy of a 3% pay increase, like clearly whether you're teachers or nurses or any of those workers, that's just not enough to, number one, catch up with what happened for the last 2 years, and number two, to even reflect, where cost of living is. It's half what cost of living increases are at the moment.
Okay, let's talk more generally, because we're pretty much at technical full employment. This is the best market for employees that we've seen in many years. Why aren't wages going up?
Yep, this is such a good point. It was we were told for a long time that all you got to do is make sure unemployment goes down and magically wages will go up, and hopefully everyone could see that that's not the way things work. Actually, yes, it makes a difference, but it doesn't make a big across the board difference. And that's simply because there's a big issue in our country in terms of the underlying bargaining power that workers have. And so employers don't just, wake up one day and say, OK, I'm going to give people pay rises. Some do, but most don't. It's got to do with how much power you have to be able to negotiate a pay rise. So the reason why it's not happening is employers aren't wanting to give those pay rises. A whole lot of them are wanting to lock in the profits they got at the moment, how well they're doing at the moment, and if they don't have to give those pay rises, they're not giving them.
That's big business, but let's talk small business, because is part of the problem here that these small businesses are still trying to claw back, 2 years of lost revenue?
Well, with small business, we're in a situation where they're entirely, their recovery and their future prosperity depends on consumer spending. And that's all the locals in the community, working people being able to have money to spend. And where you've got a situation of inflation cutting into people's discretionary spending, that means people stop spending in small businesses. So the future of both working people and small businesses are tied in that way. Yeah. It harms them if we've got less to spend. And so, we've all talked about the dangers of inflation and all of that, but all of that's not been caused by wages, not been caused by wages at all. I mean, I don't think anyone's trying to say even that. It's caused by global issues, and in fact, a lot to do actually with big businesses just passing on those pay rises and not wanting to take any clip at all off their profit margins.
Labor has often said, it was a design feature of the previous government, but that design, if you like, is continuing into this term. I know it's only early, but what do you expect Labor to do to fix low wages in this term?
Well, I think that you're right that it's a design feature, and that's recognised to be the case, because the problem with low wage growth isn't just a problem this year when inflation's so high. It's actually been a problem now for 9 years. So in order to fix it, the very first thing you've got to do is recognise, OK, what type of wages system do we need for today's economy? Because the system we've got is one that's been locked in for a long period of time that had its genesis back 30 years ago. So
what is the alternative, Sally?
Yeah, well, these are the discussions we want to have at the Job Summit with employers. There's a lot of options there to consider in terms of making bargaining work for everyone. At the moment, we've got a big problem in that there's only 15% of the workforce that are covered by collective bargaining now. And you've got two engine rooms of wage increases. You've got, number one, the annual wage review, which kicks in for all workers from tomorrow, that get it from tomorrow. And then on top of that, you've got bargaining. If you've got bargaining failing, well, of course, that's going to affect the whole economy. So we've got to fix the bargaining system.
But you can't have bargaining across the entire employee market, can you? I mean, how can you have bargaining with collective bargaining with small business? It only works to a point. And on that, I mean, I know we're different from the 1970s, but people aren't looking to unions like they used to. Is that on you?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of issues in there. We've never, ever had small business being members of unions. Like, even when the union movement in its heyday was at like 60% union membership, wasn't like the corner store, like, was full of union members. So I'm not sort of envisaging that that's going to happen tomorrow either, or that we're trying to aim to do that. It will be the case that most of those small businesses that are retail and hospo places will still be dependent on awards and those changes that come through. And I don't see that we're proposing, or anyone's proposing, any changes there. Really, we're talking about beyond that. So those jobs that are beyond those minimum wage jobs, what can be done to ensure that as a country, we're a country that's got decent, high-paid jobs that reflect skills and productivity that the workforce is contributing.
Yeah, Sally, do you accept that the real-world product of some of these enterprise bargaining agreements haven't worked for workers, and sometimes that has got it wrong? Overall, people haven't been better off, whether it's the days that they have to work, and it seems like some of these big corporations have essentially gamed the system so they don't have to pay weekend penalties.
Yeah, there's been heaps of gaming of the system. I mean, what happens with any set of laws, just like with the tax laws? I mean, there's a drive all the time from people who have money to say, okay, how can we use these laws or get around them or game them? And that's absolutely what's happened to workers' rights. So, for example, what some employers will do is that they might bargain with their employees. They do come to a good agreement and fair pay with good pay increases, and then you've got a new management that comes along and says, no, well, look, we'll just outsource, we'll send it off to labour hire, and goodbye to all those conditions. So that's a form of gaming that's happened. I could point, unfortunately, to about 10 of those different examples. And so when you're thinking about fixing the system, you've got to think about it like in a holistic way, which we are really ready to do. We want a system that works for the future. All we want is for working people to fairly share in, the nation's wealth, and at the moment we're not.
Two quick things ahead of the Job Summit. 400 jobs need to be filled in this country. How many of them will need to be filled by migrants?
I don't know how many will need to be filled by migrants.
Roundabout?
I do know that we've got to increase the number of working people that we have. That's clear. Like, no one's arguing about that. And one of the biggest ways we can do that is free up all this capacity that's currently, here, and that is all the working women that at the moment aren't working because they can't get affordable childcare. So once changes to that come in, that's going to free up a whole lot of skilled workers that will be able to contribute. Certainly in terms of a whole lot of areas, because we haven't been able to get all of those overseas students back, and they also create jobs in the university sector. That means that there's been pressure at that bottom end of the labour market. So obviously we want to see universities get back on their feet, and that means having overseas students here. That will make a big difference. Then we want to make sure that we don't build a system that's based on workers being ripped off and wage theft and exploitation, which unfortunately is the point we got to before. This is an opportunity to make sure that we're bringing people in, we're making sure that it's for proper skills. And secondly, like, when we think about migration, it's much better to have a country that's based on permanent migration rather than having a guest worker state, which is where we were turning before.
All right, Sally McManus, great to talk to you. We'll speak soon.